So the back squat is a great full body exercise. As far as building that lower body strength, I prefer it to the leg press just because of that. It involves the whole body. You're working more muscles. So it is somewhat of a complex movement, so setup is very important. And I usually address the bar position first. With my athletes, I don't really stress one way or the other. It's whatever they're comfortable with, high trap, low trap. The low trap does put a little more focus on the hips and take some of the stress away from the lower back. So I do like that, but again, I let them choose that, whatever they're comfortable with. As far as hand position, same thing. As close to the body as possible while being comfortable. And then feet position, we're just outside hip width with your toes pointed out. That allows the knees to track properly, and I found that it just gives a little more flexibility around the hip, allows the athletes to sit down a little better. So once they're comfortable with all the three phases of that, three positions, I tell them to take a big air in. And that's not just taking a big air in and holding it. I tell them to try and squeeze their abs through their stomach. That's just going to give you a real good drive out of the bottom and protect the spine. So once they've got that, they're set, they've got that big air in, they're squeezing their core. First movement is hips backwards. You see a lot of people in public gyms and even some people in the weight room, their first movement is straight down. And what you see with that is your knees tracking directly over your toes. That's going to put a lot of stress on the knees. Just like the lower back, you're outside practicing hours and hours during the week. You're in the weight room a few hours in the week. It's a lot of stress on the body already. So you want to avoid any extra stress on the knee that you can. So a cue that I like to give my athletes is that imagine you have a seat that's just out of reach behind you. And if you don't really reach your hips and your butt backwards, you're going to fall on the ground. And that just gives them a good visual cue that they can imagine while they're doing the movement. So once they've started the movement, their hips are going backwards, you're going to control the weight down. Don't just drop down to the ground. It takes a lot of energy and strength to reverse that momentum. Whereas if you control it down, you can use all that strength on the way up. And we go all the way down to parallel, so thighs are going to be parallel with the ground at the bottom. Control it down to that position. And then as you're coming up, you're going to push the floor away from you, driving through your heels. It's very important that you don't come onto your toes, because again, as soon as you do that, your knees coming over, a lot of stress on your knees. And another thing, as you're coming up, you really want to push your knees out. A pretty good sign of weakness in the hips is that when you're coming up from the squat, your knees cave in. And obviously the risk for injury is increased big time on that one. So I really enforce the rule of pushing your knees out on the way up. And we do a lot of prehab exercises using bands, hip mobility, a lot of good exercises to strengthen the hips, and then also practicing pushing the knees out on the way up, just to avoid injury. And then they're maintaining their tight core throughout the lift. It's no good taking that big air in, squeezing the core at the start, if you just loosen up at the bottom, because you lose that drive out of the bottom. And then again, pushing the floor away through their heels and working that speed coming up. I tell them to control the weight down, but come up as fast as you want. So we're going to have Stormy from the softball team here at USF demonstrate a couple of squats. All right, Stormy, adjust the bar. Hand position where it's comfortable, as tight to the body as possible. Again, trap position, high or low, high on there. And then feet are going to be just outside hip width apart, pointed slightly out. All right, so once the athlete's set up, they're comfortable, first movement is going to be hips backwards, as opposed to dropping straight down. When you do that, your knees come over your toes, putting a lot of stress on the knees. So you're going to have the weight on their heels. First movement is hips back, imagining that you're sitting back onto a chair. It's just out of reach. You really have to shove your hips backwards. Once you do that, control down, thighs parallel with the ground, and drive up through your heels. So we'll see a couple of reps real time. Good, sitting back. Drive up. Good. So as I mentioned in the introduction, what you want to avoid is your knees caving in on the way up. So you go down to parallel, driving through your heels, pushing your knees out on the way up.